Very crazy, and please welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. I wasn't personally on the International Space Station, I want to make that clear. Could everyone hear me at the back? Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me? Wonderful, fantastic. Thank you so much for the introduction there, Paul, and thank you so much for everyone for coming here today. My name is Dan. I am a product management coach. I'm also a consultant with a passion for the pro-social, and because I clearly have too much time on my hands, I'm also an engineering manager for the Citizens Advice Bureau. So don't ask me how I ended up with 3 jobs, just woke up one day and that's how it was. It is my product coaching hat, though, that I'm going to be wearing today, and I'm going to share how everyone in this room can create a product management discipline that genuinely, finally, fulfills the promise of making the world a better place. Before we get to that point, though, I would like to take us back a few steps by asking what I think is quite a simple question. And that question is, what is the purpose of product managers? Indeed, if I were being a little bit uncharitable, I might ask, what is the point of product managers? Because, I know, because we're not essential to the product development process, despite what we might like to think, right? We're not essential in the way that engineers are essential. The people who actually build and maintain the app or the website. And they write the code as well. And we're not essential the way that designers are essential. The people whose vision and skill turn product ideas into something appealing that users understand and actually enjoy using. In the history of product development, thousands, if not millions of products, both digital and analog, have been successfully launched into the world without the input of someone called the product manager. So, with all that said, what are we actually for? I'd say that the value of a product manager is that there is at least one person whose responsibility it is to ensure that we are building the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. That is their purpose, that is their reason for being. Now, as we know, many organizations will sadly conflate the role with project management or diminish their scope to that of a feature broker, as I think Marty Kagan called it, trading development time amongst stakeholders to ensure that everybody feels like they're making a contribution. And I can see some wry smiles from people here for whom that might be a little bit familiar. But when organizations fall into this trap, things won't necessarily fall apart. I mean, not right away at least, but there will invariably follow a nagging sense that opportunities are being missed, that insights are going unexplored, and there's this lack of focus on what truly matters. By contrast, you may have been fortunate enough to witness an organization where a skilled product manager has earned the space, and I say earned because they're rarely given this opportunity freely, to ply their trade to its fullest extent. When an effective product manager is baked into the product development process, you have a person whose job it is to be the undisputed expert in your users and how they engage with your product. They will tell you who your users are and what problems each group of those users is trying to solve. They will challenge assumptions, push back on initiatives driven by bias, and pursue meaningful data with an almost religious zeal. They provide a direction, a North Star to steer by, and a strong, compelling narrative that lets everyone around you know that this is the story of our product and how it can make the lives of our users better. So far, so straightforward. Maybe a little predictable. And given the audience here today, I doubt that much of what I said is particularly controversial. And yet I can't help feel like our skills are being wasted. Oh, listen to me using the passive voice. Our skills are being wasted. Let me be more explicit. We, product managers, we are wasting our skills. Or if wasting is too strong a word, we are at least misusing them, I think. As a discipline, as an industry, we talk a lot about building products that our users love. But what do we really mean by this? Is it really love that we're talking about? That deep mutual connection that we feel in our soul? That passionate commitment to each other's happiness? A bond forged in shared affection and hopes for the future? Is that what we're actually doing with our products? Those products that we spend 5 days out of every 7 working to improve, making more appealing, championing to the world? Maybe it is. Maybe it is. Or maybe When we talk about building products that users love, what we're actually trying to do is justify our product's existence. After all, if we can build products that users engage with, or spend money on, or that fundamentally challenge the way that people think about their world and their places in it, then we can pat ourselves on the back and tell ourselves that those are good reasons for the product to exist and that we as product people have done our job well. And maybe we have done our job well, because we've used our skills to achieve our product goals. But are achievements like this really making the world a better place? Do we need yet another productivity app gamifying our existence? Is that something that we really need? Is humanity best served by online checkouts optimized to increase cart value, especially during a cost of living crisis? Is disrupting local housing markets or inventing new forms of precarious labor or meme-based currencies based on environmental Armageddon? Are these really the best ways we can come up with to spend our time? And, this may all sound hopelessly naive. I have been accused of being hopelessly naive in the past. And it may remind you of what Kenneth Bowles says and how he describes the problem in his book, Future Ethics, quote, "The idea that a rank-and-file technologist can change the culture of a large firm, let alone the industry, reminds me of a lovesick teenager's desperate attempts to heal a difficult partner. It's a generous but ultimately doomed act that saps emotional energy," end quote. And actually, I don't disagree with this, as sad as it sounds. But I do think that sociology and bringing a sociological lens, a sociological imagination to our product practice can help us navigate this tricky terrain. Auguste Comte called sociology the scientific study of society. He saw society as not something that we just experience, but as something we can study with a scientific rigor. We can be systematic about it, we can observe it, and we can understand it by using the scientific study of society. Emil Durkheim, another distinguished sociologist, said that sociology is the study of social facts, such as norms, values, and institutions. So we're progressing from beyond a scientific study of society, and we're saying that there are observable things that we can use to understand society and our place in it, the study of social facts like norms, values, and institutions. George Simmel said it was a framework for understanding social groups through their interactions. So that brings another element of complexity and another way that we can understand society and the social world and our places in it, through interactions. So it's not just social facts, but there's interactions are something we can examine scientifically as well. And Pierre Bourdieu saw sociology as a way to explore power dynamics between people. So there's power now. There's power that we can observe scientifically by understanding social facts like norms, values, and institutions, and observing the interactions between social groups. One of my favorite definitions, though, is from David Newman's book, Exploring the Architecture of Everyday Life. And he says, quote, "Sociology is a liberating perspective. A liberating perspective. It forces us to look at the social processes that influence our thoughts, perceptions, and actions, and helps us see how social change occurs and the impact that we can have on others." So it's a liberating perspective. Liberating, it means it can free us from the conventions, from the assumptions that we make about how we live, about things which are really personal to us, our thoughts, our perceptions, our actions. He makes the argument that these things are socially contingent. These are social processes. These aren't just internal to us that have emerged out of the ether. The role of a sociologist, then, is to bring rigor to humanity's efforts to understand the myriad relationships between a person and their wider social world, to articulate those intangible power dynamics of social groups and their real-world consequences, and to challenge the assumptions of social behavior being just natural or somehow inherent to our being. For a sociologist, our world and everything in it is socially constructed and reconstructed by the interplay of social relationships. And to think like a sociologist means to search for the context behind the choices that we make and the things that we do. Not only this, it trains us to think in terms of social action and social consequence, and of the costs and benefits to the wider social world. For a product manager, someone whose value lies in building actionable insights into the people who use their product, Could any way of thinking be more useful? Could any skill set be more practical than that of a sociologist? Someone who is trained in both research and critical thinking to look beyond the assumptions of who people are and what they do and dig into the why. This is Product Discovery 101, something that all product managers, everyone here today, aspires to be excellent at. And yet, when was the last time you saw a product job description that listed a sociology degree as a requirement rather than computer science or business or an MBA? It is possible, just possible, that so far you're not entirely convinced by my argument about the value of sociology for product managers, and that is absolutely okay. No self-respecting product manager will just take my word for it. So, I'd like to give you an example of the application of the sociological imagination in real life. I'd like to take a moment first, though, I'd like to ask you to close your eyes, and I'll tell you when you can reopen them. Imagine New York City. Picture it in your mind's eye. It's a vast, sprawling metropolis of 8 million people, rich and old, rich and poor, young and old, residents and tourists. It's full of homes, businesses, the famous skyline, of course. It has traffic, the subway network, power cables, sewage systems, mail delivery, hospitals, schools, and countless other networks and interconnections. Just hold that in your mind's eye for a moment. Thank you. Please open your eyes. Think of all the relationships in that city, all the social groups, all the interplays of power and status. When we think of the real world, like term the real world, it doesn't get much more real than this. And if it were a product, it would be the most complex product imaginable. How on earth would you start prioritizing a backlog for a city? How would you even begin to understand how your users engage with your product or understand their needs? It turns out, though, that we can do precisely this. Apparently chaotic at first glance, and perhaps even second glance, through the right framing, a kind of underlying structure emerges from beneath the surface of chaos. And this is what sociologist William White describes in his 1980 study on the social life of small urban spaces. Observing the city streets and plazas, White saw that certain spaces in the city were more successful than others, using criteria for success that would be very familiar to any product manager here today. Do people visit it? Do they spend time there? Do they return? Do they bring their friends? Are they happy? And could they be happier? If you are a product manager, these are some of the fundamental questions that you are asking every day about your users and their relationship with your product. So what was it about these spaces that made them so successful? Well, for White, there were three fundamental features above all others that made for a successful public space. The first thing, there must be plentiful seating. The seating would ideally be movable, but if not, then there should at least be scope for personal choice. Steps, like these, proving especially popular as they allowed the visitor to select what level they wished to sit at, so they had an element of control. So first, there must be plentiful seating. The second thing, there must be access to light and preferably sunlight. Warmth was actually less of a concern, strangely enough, but as public spaces fell into shade, there was a significant decline in their level of success. So sunlight. And lastly, the space must be open to the surrounding area. The most successful spaces allowed a wanderer to enter simply by stepping off the sidewalk. So, accessibility. And that was it. That was literally it. Those were the three factors that made the difference between an area of the city that attracted thousands of people every day and an area 2 minutes away of apparently similar construction that might see a handful of passers-by, and certainly no dawdlers. The lesson here for product people is one that we often forget or make exceptions for. That a product that does a small number of things extremely well and meet genuine user need will outperform a less focused product that does hundreds of things at a mediocre level. What's even more insightful, perhaps, is what we learn about the spaces that are unsuccessful. Features that might be considered attractive or a source of protection from the roads or traffic, like sculpted hedgerows or ornate iron fencing on leafy foliage. Those things often made a place less appealing because they felt more closed off and thus less safe. Water features too were precarious additions. They could be a benefit, but often they caused seating areas to become damp and unusable, or strict rules concerning their use meant users were unable to cool their feet on a hot summer's day. I think we could all use something like that today. Other controlling behaviour, like adding sharp stones or metal spikes to ledges to prevent dawdlers or rough sleepers, was even more damaging. Product managers listening here today will recall other examples of misguided attempts to improve products that actually drove users away, or how poorly assertions of control over the use of a product were received by otherwise committed communities. Anyone who's been part of an online community or a message board when new moderation rules come in will understand what that's like. I mentioned earlier that one of the great strengths of sociology and its value to product managers is its capacity for providing context for human action, the context for human action. When White looked at the public spaces in New York City, he also saw a fascinating example of what happens when decisions are taken on the basis of poorly understood behaviour. When city officials noted that people liked to congregate in certain popular plazas, they came to the conclusion that this was a good thing. This is a good thing. We're happy with this. We want more of it. And they were worried about the availability of these spaces as the city became more crowded and the demand for high-density buildings like skyscrapers left open space at a premium. So far, so good. The city's product managers have identified a key feature for the success of their product, and they've also spotted the risk. Good job then. To deal with this problem, they imposed a planning restriction on all new skyscrapers, limiting the buildings to far below their desired number of stories. They then provided an incentive to the development companies. They could have those extra stories that they wanted, but only if they included open space for the public at ground level. For every X square feet at ground level dedicated to open space, they could add further stories to their skyscraper, where every extra story represented a potentially enormous financial benefit to that property developer. Now, taken at face value, this seems like an eminently sensible solution, right? Providing a compelling incentive to encourage behaviour from users that we believe will lead to desirable outcomes. I bet many of us here would make a similar decision when developing our own products without a second's hesitation. So, good decision? No, of course not. Because, as we know, I wouldn't have asked if it was going to be a good decision, but fundamentally, we've understood there's something missing here. We've already learned that there are reasons why some spaces are socially successful. Places to sit, access to sunlight, and openness with easy transitions to and from the sidewalk. This was the context that White had identified, and without this insight, those incentives were doomed to fail. Enormous plazas did spring up around the city as property developers responded to the initiative as planners had expected them to, but they remained stubbornly empty and unused. There was no seating. The plazas were often in the shade from these enormous skyscrapers that were right next to them, and fences and aggressive security guards discouraged public access. Or at least, nobody stayed there for very long. The investment had been made to improve their product, but the features went ignored and unloved by users. Context, as we can see, is critical. I hope that by now, even if you don't think that product managers should care about sociology in an academic sense, you can start to see the benefit that thinking sociologically or using a sociological imagination through a sociological lens, the benefits that that can have on your product practice. Now, there is far, far more to the discipline than I've shared with you in this talk today. We simply do not have the time. But I do want to share 3 questions with you that you can take away with you once this conference is over and use to orient your thinking towards sociological insight. The first question: am I looking at a symptom or am I looking at a cause? The city planners who encouraged property developers to build enormous plazas thought they were doing the right thing. People usually do. But they made that classic product mistake of confusing the output for the outcome. Now, we hear that phrase so often that it's almost become a cliche. Outcomes over outputs, outcomes over outputs. But there's a lesson here that even the most experienced product people can lose sight of. Features are not the goal. Features are not the goal. User benefit is the goal, and it's our responsibility, even in organizations that see us as project wranglers or feature brokers, to ensure that we're doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. And when I say right here, I don't mean convenient or profitable. I mean it in the genuinely moral sense. To do the right thing at the right time and for the right reasons. So that's question one. Question two. Is this decision for my benefit or for my users' benefit? I spoke earlier about the inclusion of deliberate obstacles to discourage people from using spaces in a way that they wanted. And in our product work, we can sometimes find ourselves being similarly controlling about user behavior. And we should ask ourselves, am I making these decisions because I truly believe it will benefit my users in the long run? Or is this simply to make my life easier, to prevent me from having to do deep reflections on my motivations or for asking difficult questions about my values and whether I'm living up to them? What biases am I carrying with me that I'm not acknowledging? Is my product genuinely making life better for people? Is my personal ambition blinding my judgment about right and wrong? What social consequences am I overlooking or rationalizing away because it's inconvenient to think too much about them? And our product instincts, the instinct we've developed over decades of experience, that can actually lead us astray here. It can lead us down the path of least resistance or provoke our ego to break down barriers without taking the time to consider what might be on the other side and who those barriers might have been protecting. So question two, is this decision for my benefit or for my users' benefit? And question three, who is missing from my assumptions? The architects who added hedgerows and gates to those public spaces, they'd have been far less surprised about their failure if only they'd spoken to more women. The fear of mugging and harassment that such enclosed spaces brought was a repeated theme in White's research. So, when you're planning your next feature and you're listing your assumptions, as I'm sure we all do, read that list again. I know accessibility is a hot topic right now, and for good reason, but our approaches can all too easily fall into the trap of box ticking, or seeing accessibility as a problem to solve, rather than a more fundamental question about what your product does and why it exists at all. I think as product managers, we need to get a lot more comfortable with that question of whether our product should exist and what we should do if we think it doesn't or shouldn't. So, ask women, people of colour, people with mobility issues and other disabilities, people across the spectrums of social class, what are you missing? Pay them for their time, by the way, we heard this earlier. Unpaid labour, not cool. It could not only save you a fortune in wasted effort, but prevent unintentional but no less real harm. Unintentional harm is still harm. When we rely on empathy rather than inclusion, and I'm guilty of this myself, I see myself as an empathetic person, but when we rely on empathy rather than inclusion, it's so easy to miss systemic issues that our products either fail to account for or at worst actively reinforce. I'm sure everyone here today can think of products that exist in the world that actively reinforce systemic issues that harm people, even if it isn't someone who looks like us. That's the third question. Who is missing from my assumptions? I want to end now by returning to Kenneth Bowles and his comparison of the individual technologist trying to change the industry as the hopeless endeavours of a lovesick teenager, idealism ground into dust. Now, this may be a depressing image, but he does also offer us a way forward, with concrete changes we can make to our practice. He encourages us to think of society as a stakeholder, and to appreciate the social contract that we make with the wider community when we release our products into the world. We have a responsibility to think of future generations, not just the next release. And as product people, we have more power here to shape that future than I think we realize. I believe that sociology provides us with a liberating perspective on the world, and I hope that it will help you liberate your product practice. Thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to take questions, by the way.
What a perfect circle.
Wonderful.
So, questions from the audience? Any questions?
Hello.
He's got his own mic, so.
So I was thinking, about something like analytics, and how collecting analytics might not benefit the user, but it could be used to potentially benefit the user, making the product better, or it could be used to optimize the shopping basket to sell more to them. And I was just wondering your thoughts on something that's like that, where it can be used for good or for ill.
Yeah, a really good...
Not necessarily to the benefit of the individual users themselves.
Yeah, for sure. A really good question, and a very appropriate one, because I think it's something that a lot of us would think about, analytics. I think one of the challenges that I've seen in a lot of not just product work, but work generally, is the sort of slightly unthinking nature by which we approach problems like this. So I guess the collecting analytics by default being a good example of that kind of sort of slightly mindless behavior, where it hasn't been justified, where a use case hasn't really been made for it that says, okay, well, what is the trade-off that we're actually making? Because I think a lot of people don't really see it as a problem. Like, it's kind of accepted that, okay, well, people really, they know that they're giving up private data about their own personal privacy, about their behavior online when they visit websites. So, they know that there's an exchange going on here, but I don't think they really do. I think the kind of cookies banner that's been cropping up over the last couple of years, I don't think that's a particularly elegant way to solve that problem, because it's just changed one problem with another problem. But I think what we probably should be doing a lot more of as product people is questioning the decision to collect data by default, for example, or whatever it is. I think that's the real kind of key to it. I mean, that's less of it's not really a practical answer in the sense of specifically about analytics, but understanding what it is that we actually want that data for and how are we justifying it. I think that would be a fantastic first step to see from organizations, rather than just assuming, yeah, it's okay because people expect their data to be harvested and sold back to Google and used in advertising and all that sort of wonderful stuff. So I think that's what I'd probably say about analytics.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Ooh,
Yeah.
Hi, Dan. Love the talk, thank you. Sorry, it's very, very loud. So you kind of mentioned that sociology isn't really a thing which is searched for in job specs for product managers and product owners, etc. I'm curious, where do people with a sociology education end up? What type of roles are they in now if we were to go and find sociologists and pull them into product?
Yeah, good question. I mean, a lot of the traditional pathways for sociologists are academia. They go into teaching as well. That's another particularly common one. Some go into social research organizations, like social research is a thing, particularly in the public sector, so sometimes they'll go into that kind of field. If they're particularly numerate, then there's other kinds of analytics kind of fields which sociologists migrate into. So that's probably where it would start looking. Yeah, I do think it's interesting that social sciences in general haven't taken off more in tech, considering the kinds of conversations we've seen over the last couple of decades, really. I mean, even before then, we've been talking about the social consequences of technology. We heard about Simone de Beauvoir talking about it in the 1940s and 30s. So I do think it's kind of odd that we put this emphasis on hard technical skills as being, okay, that's the barrier to entry into technological fields, where in practice those are things that can be taught relatively, not necessarily easily, but there exists curriculums for training someone to learn a programming language or to do data analysis or whatever. But the kind of sociological mindset that I'm talking about is generally not something that you can pick up through a workshop. It tends to be something that is developed over a number of months or years. So it's interesting that we talk about core skills being something we look for when we're doing hiring, but I wonder if more of a kind of a sociological angle to that might be something we should start looking for as well. Thank you. At the back there.
I'm hugely passionate about sociology, and I just wondered, I just wondered if you happen to have anything I could read about more around the social identity theory and how that can make products more relatable for clients or customers.
Probably. Give me some time to think about it, and I'll come find you later.
Lovely. Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
I think there's a hand up over here.
Thank you. Great talk, by the way.
Thank you.
This might be a bit meta, so you don't have to answer that question.
Okay. Love it.
I loved your example with the city, and I've been looking a little bit at like NEOM being built in Saudi Arabia, this kind of new city they're building, where they're using digital twins to model citizens' behavior and then adapt the city to behavior. But they also have like an underlying value framework because the Sharia-based law in Saudi Arabia. So, and then if you look at China, they have other kind of the social credit system and stuff. Do you, so when you talk about like making this good from a social perspective, that's all great, but that's all based on values that sit underneath. Have you got any thoughts about a value framework, how you, define what good means?
Yeah.
Sorry, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it totally does. And actually, we heard about some of the examples of that in the talk first thing this morning, the keynote for those who were there, about some of the values and behaviours that an ethical tech company would have. So those are the kinds of things I would orient towards. I know a lot of organisations, they say, we have company values, and it's about being honest and being proactive and doing the right thing and so forth. But I would like to see that embodied not just in, I guess, the sort of promotion cycle, but like is that actually being carried through up to a leadership level? Like are those things really defining some of the hard choices around building a company, building a product, whatever it is? Because it can be quite easy to have those values and say, yes, we live by these values when the stakes are low. But when it's a question like, should this product exist? Like, is it actually doing more harm than good? And can we be objective about this? Or can we at least get other opinions that are different to our own? Because of course we think our product's great. If only we had, it's easy to live your values when the stakes are low, I guess is what I'd say.
Thank you.
Cool.
Any other questions? No, we're all good. Okay. Cool. Well, again, thank you very much for Daniel.